Without objection.
Mr. President, it was about a year ago, and I was invited to go to the southeast part of the city of Chicago. It's an area that used to be populated by steel mills and now is a lot of struggle. The manufacturing jobs weren't replaced. These are hardworking people, many of them Mexican-American people, and they sustain what you might expect. Great parishes and churches and a great spirit among them, but they are in a constant struggle. They live in that part of Chicago that has seen better days. They're doing their darndest for their families, and they invited me to see something. What they wanted me to come see is what they were living next door to. I went down to that part of the city of Chicago, within the boundaries of the city of Chicago, and I couldn't believe what I saw. You see, they live in little houses like these that you see along the way, and across from them is this mountainous gathering of something called pet coke. What is pet coke? If you take the Canadian tar sands that are going to move through the Keystone XL Pipeline to a refinery and put them through a process where you can end up with a viable product, gasoline, jet fuel, diesel fuel, whatever it happens to be, you have to clean out all of this pet coke that creates this tar sands composition that they're dealing with. And when it's all over, if the process has been successful, there is a lot of waste. In fact, let me make sure I get this correctly. 61 pounds of pet coke for every barrel of oil. Keeping in mind, as the senator has told us, who is sponsoring the underlying legislation, we're dealing with moving hundreds of thousands of barrels a day through this pipeline. Now take every one of those barrels and have 61 pounds of pet coke left over as a result of the refining process. Well, what happens to it? This is what happened to it in Chicago. It was dumped in the neighborhood. And the people invited me to come to their homes, and I did. And I walked into this woman's home, and she said, I've sealed the windows, I've taped them shut, because this black, sooty pet coke blows my windows night and day. I can't stop it. Is it something to worry about? It turns out this pet coke that we're talking about is not a benign material. We're not talking about dust in the air. We are talking about a composition here that includes, according to those who have taken a close look at it, heavy metals. Would you want your baby in your home or my grandchildren breathing in this filthy pet coke infested dust night and day? And they aren't making it up, because they show me the windowsills, and you can see it, this black, sooty pet coke. Well, let me tell you the details on the story here. The environmental review for the project of Keystone XL notes that communities throughout the Midwest have noticed large piles of petroleum coke or pet coke building up as more and more tar sands are processed. This picture tells a story. This is near a body of water which is carrying this pet coke as well on the water. These poor folks deal with it as it blows through the air. This type of crude oil carried by the Keystone XL Pipeline, a pipeline which the Republican majority has decided is their #1 priority in the United States Senate. Senate Bill #1, under the new Republican majority. This pipeline, on behalf of a Canadian company, TransCanada, is the topic that we're facing here. And we just had a vote, incidentally, and unfortunately could not prevail with the notion that at least the oil that comes out of that pipeline ought to be for the benefit of American consumers. We lost that. I think the vote was 57 to 42. We lost that vote. It was tabled. But let's talk about the actual process itself. According to the EPA, as I mentioned, the environmental impact statement, every barrel of tar sands contains 61 pounds of pet coke. That means the Keystone XL Pipeline alone will produce 15,400 metric tons of pet coke every day. 15,400 metric tons of pet coke every day. Would you like to live next door to that? That's what's happening in the city of Chicago. But it's not the only one. This pet coke comes from the BP, British Petroleum Refinery in Whiting, Indiana. It is on the very southern tip of Lake Michigan. It is located, we can see it from the city of Chicago. They went through a $4 billion upgrade, put in new equipment so they could start processing these Canadian tar sands, which are going to come down through the Keystone XL Pipeline. Soon after they started this processing with $4 billion of new equipment, the people living in this part of Chicago looked out their window to see these massive piles of petcoke building up. And as a consequence, they got worried. They're worried for their children. On windy days, it is the Windy City, in fact, in Chicago, black clouds of this dust blow from piles into this working-class neighborhood. Always seems to be the case, doesn't it? If somebody tried to put this on the North Shore of Chicago, they'd scream bloody murder. But the company that owns this petcoke put it outside a poor neighborhood, a working-class neighborhood in Chicago. The dust, petcoke dust, settles on windowsills and porches, and I met the kids running outside. They're producing 6,000 tons of petcoke every single day at the British Petroleum Refinery in Whiting, Indiana. 6,000 tons a day. At that rate, the plant has only room to store a few days' worth of production on site. So they ended up selling the petcoke to a company, KCBX. It is a subsidiary company owned by the Koch brothers. Yes, those Koch brothers. Connect the dots here. The highest priority of the Republican majority in the Senate was to call a bill for a Canadian company to transport oil across the United States, tar sands across the United States, with no promise that the American consumers would ever be able to access it. And the process of refining the Canadian tar sands ends up inuring to the benefit of many companies, British Petroleum, others, and KCBX, owned by the Koch brothers. The same Koch brothers who are viable political players in our political campaigns. This means that the people in Southeast Chicago are forced to breathe this dirty air that members of the National Nurses United say causes severe health threats. Petcoke contains high levels of heavy metals like vanadium and nickel, and dust particles get trapped in residents' lungs, triggering asthma and exacerbating heart and lung conditions. Mr. President, I make a point when I go to a school to ask a very basic question. Every school, rural and urban. Does anybody in this classroom, any student here, know anyone with asthma? Half the hands are up. In every classroom, our pages are starting to raise their hands. Of course. So here you have a national problem, a respiratory problem, which is made dramatically worse by the byproduct from the Keystone XL Pipeline of petcoke. That's a fact. What I've argued to you now so far is indisputable. The community and members of the Southeast Environmental Task Force that I visited with in Chicago are fighting back with the help of the National Resources Defense Council. They've worked with Mayor Emanuel and the Chicago officials to put standards in place for petcoke storage sites that protect public and environmental health. They've come up with a radical notion. If you want to store this dangerous petcoke, then for goodness sakes, put it inside a building so it doesn't blow all over the neighborhood. They are suing KCBX and Koch Industries for the damages caused by petcoke piles after the Environmental Protection Agency issued a notice to the company of Clean Air Act violations. The people who hate the EPA, like the devil hates holy water, don't want them to come in and look at something as outrageous as this and tell you the obvious. This is a public health danger. Petcoke from Canadian tar sands, part of the Keystone XL Pipeline, is a public health hazard. Unfortunately, petcoke just isn't an issue in Chicago or Illinois. My colleagues from Michigan, Senator Gary Peters told me a story earlier. They can tell you what happened in Detroit when another Koch brothers-owned company decided to store large piles of petcoke on the Detroit River. If you look online, you can still find the YouTube video of black clouds blowing off of the piles of the Koch brothers' petcoke into the river. In fact, Senator Peters says at one point this black cloud was so dense it obscured the ambassador